for the cause of a vibrant parliamentary democracy.
Yes, I think we issued a statement yesterday and we made it very clear where we stand on this, what we term a backdoor government. To us, it's a betrayal. And I explained to you why. Not because it is illegal or not allowed in our law. It is allowed, but I think it's a betrayal simply because when the coalition went before the public, the voters at G14, they went before them presenting a set of manifesto. I'm not just talking about Pakatan Harapan, but Barisan Nasional and others as well. And based on what they presented, and the people made their choice, and they decided to give Pakatan Harapan a 5-year mandate to carry out their promises. And now we are not even 2 years, and apparently that government has collapsed for now.
But I want to ask you, Thomas, even the expression "the people" needs to be disaggregated. There were many people who voted for Pakatan Harapan or the component parties of it, but there are also many people who voted for UMNO, voted for Barisan Nasional, voted for GPS, with very different visions of the country.
Right.
Now, if the basis, the glue that brought Pakatan disintegrated, not because of voters, but because of shifting alliances, isn't it legitimate and reasonable for new alliances to form? And is that what we're seeing now?
Okay, if there's a new reconfiguration, I like to use the word reconfiguration of the component parties, which means that the character of the alliance, the coalition has changed, and we should nullify whatever manifesto they put before the Rakyat at G14. So the right thing to do for us, if there's going to be such a reconfiguration, is go back to the Rakyat, ask for a fresh mandate based on your new manifesto. That's the right thing to do.
Is this what happens in advanced democracies, Thomas, especially in democracies that have coalition politics, have coalition governments? Is it expected that every time the coalition realigns or reconfigures, as to use your term, that you have to go back to the polls and get a fresh mandate?
I wouldn't use the word have to, but it is done. So if you look at the UK, for example, just over the last few years, I lost count of how many snap elections they had. And for reasons very much that because they needed a fresh mandate to push forward Brexit or whatever, a new prime minister come in even from the same party, and they feel that they needed a fresh mandate. They go back to the people. I think this is a way they honor the voters, not what we are seeing here, backroom dealings in posh hotels. I mean, this is really selling out the voters. I'm not just talking about PH.
Yeah, look, I wonder if part of the anxiety, especially from the community of activists and people who have put a lot of effort into thinking about, probably the only people who actually read the manifesto, is the idea that we are transiting from an authoritarian system to a democratic one. That in fact, some of the pieces aren't in place yet.
The growing pains, right?
Growing pains. The necessary institutional reforms are not, and therefore the anxiety that this moment for real change is going to be lost. Is that what's animating the anxiety?
Right. I think, I have to stress here that civil society organization like us, Bersih, our only concern is the reform agenda that is encapsulated in the Buku Harapan, the manifesto. Now, how it got into that wasn't by accident. It was through years of campaigning, pushing for it, that the Pakatan Harapan, Pakatan Rakyat opposition then put it into the manifesto. So for us, the preservation of that reform agenda is all important. That's why it's a great tragedy if we lose it.
I want to ask you very quickly, before we move into the future of the reform agenda, what's happened currently, Thomas? What's your assessment of the conduct of our institutions in the past couple of days, in particular that of the role of the Agong?
I think at this moment of crisis, I think we are thankful that we have an Agong that is careful, wants to consider exactly what is the situation of the parties, and obviously the people who triggered this collapse and thought they had the numbers, to come forward. But obviously by now we know that they don't have the numbers. It doesn't tally up, and that's why the Agong is going through. And I think we're thankful that he's handling this, but it shouldn't really come to this in the first place.
What about the other institutions? You know, in many underdeveloped countries, third world countries, you would see in a power crisis, a vacuum would be filled by the military coming out of the barracks. You'd see maybe even the police or other institutions jostling for power. The fact that it's relative calm, no strife, no violence, does that make you, you know,
confident?
Confident that there's something right going on in Malaysia?
I feel lucky, like most Malaysians, that we never have a history of the military, you know, or any armed forces getting involved with our politics. And I think that's something that we are grateful for. But I think we want to allow time also for the existing law. And the other important institution that you didn't mention is Parliament. Parliament has a role to play in determining who is the government, who has the majority vote. And the sitting is 2 weeks away from now. I think if it cannot be resolved, it's either you go for a fresh election or you wait for Parliament to open and then call for a vote of confidence against this current government. If it wins the vote, then it continues.
I mean, at the moment, the only other political configuration, calling for a vote is, in fact, those associated with the former Barisan Nasional. So the Muafakat Nasional, or parties associated with it, are now saying, if we can't form a government of national unity, that was their proposal, minus the DAP, is that how they put it, then we should have fresh elections. But is that a fair demand to make with the numbers they have?
Of course, we have said if you can't form a government, then go for fresh election. But if PH managed to prove that they have the numbers, okay, and they already received the mandate from the people at the last election, then things should continue as before. But how are they getting the new numbers? I think that is an important question that we like to know as well. But right now, everything is quite speculative.
Yeah, so there's new numbers. So the new numbers might come from parties in Sabah and Sarawak that were not part of the original pack, but will provide them the numbers. Now, what would be a deal breaker for Bersih? What would be unacceptable in the new configuration?
What would be unacceptable is that, number one, the manifesto is nullified. In other words, if they come forward and say, since now we have new partners, what we promised you earlier in the manifesto doesn't count anymore. That will be totally unacceptable for us. What would be unacceptable also if they take in people who have been charged with corruption, you know, known to be corrupt, into the coalition, to be part of government. I think that would be also unacceptable to us.
And should that happen, what would Bersih's position be?
Well, I mean, we will eventually, if they don't take heed, I think the people want to respond. And as always, Bersih take the lead in organizing mass protests, basically to make known our displeasure with what's happening.
What do you think could be the other possible scenarios coming out of the current situation? We have now the Agong meeting with the MPs. He's asked them very simple questions of who do you support or would you support a dissolution? Tun seems to have support from a broad range of political parties. But, you know, what is it that you think could happen that is unanticipated?
He could receive the broad base of support from both sides. But whether he could put the parties that supported him together in the same cabinet, same bed, that is also another question, you know, because they may not like each other. Like I think UMNO, PAS and MCA has made it known they won't work with DAP, you know. So I think they are out of the question equation, you know. So if they receive support from PAS, Tun receives support from PAS, then he can appoint them into the cabinet, and then he won't have enough numbers anyway.
I just want to come back to the possibility of fresh elections. Should there be elections called, I'm wondering whether that would be wise in the absence of completed reforms to our electoral process, to our electoral system. Is it wise to argue for polls at this stage?
Well, you know, there's still a lot of problem with our election system. Number one would be the issue of malapportionment and gerrymandering. which is not only there but has gotten worse, you know. And so going into an election is not ideal, but short of having no government or a government that could not function, you know, I think the lesser of the two evils is actually to go for a snap election.
Well, what about this other scenario? Let's say that a non-ideal coalition by Bersih standards comes, says they want to form the government, right?
Government.
They put aside most part of the manifesto, but they do say, we will go ahead with electoral reform. That would be the one thing that we promised to complete before the next general election. Would you agree to that?
You mean they just please our area of electoral reform?
Yes, it's a hypothetical, you realize
and you expect us, Bersih, to abandon our other, you know, NGOs and friends who campaign for other areas? No way. It's a whole thing or nothing.
Well, okay, we're going to take a pause, Thomas, come back to this conversation because I think there's so much more to unpack here. But we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more on Consider This, so don't you go anywhere. Thanks for staying with us. This is a special edition of Consider This. We're speaking to experts and activists to hear their voices amid the current political crisis in the country. Now, joining us on the line, we have Ahmad Fuad Rahmat, Assistant Professor with the School of Media, Languages and Culture at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Fuad, good evening. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today. Now, in the months leading up to the crisis and the collapse of the Pakatan Harapan government, you were observing how counter-narratives were being shaped. You know, they were all in opposition to what Malaysia Baru stood for, things like democracy and institutional reform and others. What do you think were some of the anxieties that were expressed in these counter-narratives?
Well, the most pertinent one to what's happening now is the prevalent sense that Malays were somehow excluded in the reform agenda. The government wasn't really responding to their concerns, and that overall, other than some lip service, the perception was that Malay sentiment was something that could be neglected or made secondary. So every time some issue came up, it would kind of just lead to, you know, polarization. So one after the other, from the Zakir Naik issue the Adib inquest, to Jawi, PPSMI, every issue became racialized, and it just snowballed to this groundswell of sentiment that's leading to where things are today.
Fuad, we kind of expect the counter-narrative to come from those parties that lost, right? So the parliamentary opposition made up of PAS or made up of UMNO, leading that narrative, perhaps, organizing and mobilizing around the anti-ISID protests and such. But was it just the political parties, or was this a much more generalized anxiety coming out from just very ordinary people with no necessary political commitments?
Yeah. So I don't think they were orchestrating the sentiment. I think it was just something that amassed over time, and I think you have to factor in a weakening economy as one of the reasons for this. And let's not forget, a lot of Malays voted for Pakatan largely because of Mahathir. He was a symbolic presence in the opposition then, who could somehow carry the Malay agenda in the reform agenda. That did not happen, and I think they were disappointed, and you could just sense that they wanted changes, and they wanted their sentiment to be reflected, and this was what led to the by-election losses recently. So what's happening today is in a lot of ways responding to that. It was a kind of reading of the political temperature, and some of the opportunists felt that they could strike now because there was sentiment on the ground that legitimized this.
So could you give us some examples for it? I mean, specifically, what are these forums or platforms that have emerged in which these anxieties that you speak of, primarily from the Malay segments, society segments, that are being expressed? What platforms?
Sure. So if you just notice on YouTube, you'll find a noticeable presence of alternative media in Bahasa, actually. Now, they're not all pro-PAS or pro-UMNO, but they are, I guess I would safely say, pro-Malay in the sense that, they're all in Bahasa. They're actually giving a lot of attention to a lot of issues that I guess mainstream liberal media tend to neglect or ignore. For example, the restructuring of PPRs, right? PPRs are predominantly Malay populated, right? Or the mismanagement of tabung haji, or the fact that there was a sermon on Friday that told the Malays that they don't really have to go to Hajj if they can't afford it, which is contrary to what tabung haji was established. So some of the platforms are like TV per TV, for example, MH Online. I guess one can say by and large they're conservative, but they're responding to a need to be recognized, a need to be heard by a huge segment of the Malay population. If you just look at their views, a basic video can come up to 100,000 views easily, 200,000 views. Jom Channel is a bit more, I guess, pro-government or pro-last government, I guess, a little bit more pro-Pakatan. But overall, they're giving a lot of the dissatisfaction among the Malay masses some kind of platform where they can kind of be heard and organized and stuff like that. So, we tend to think of freedom of expression as a kind of a liberal agenda, but if you just kind of apply what's going on in these platforms along those lines, you kind of see that this is an exercise of free expression. Obviously in a very ethnocentric way, but they're using new media to be heard.
Fuad, and in your observations, are you seeing that the content is increasing or the viewership is increasing? I mean, is it the supply or the demand?
I would say both. I think what's happened since 2018, since Malaysia Baru, is that the Malay populace largely, they do not have leadership. But there is a lot of dissatisfaction, and it's materializing into these platforms where they can just discourse with each other. So there's a vibrant comment section. There's a lot of analysis that goes on in these platforms, and they're not necessarily by political leaders. They're by various NGO figures, but they're touching on a particular, I guess, need for a leaderless political bloc to just air out their grievances. So it becomes a way in which the community can kind of see themselves in the mediascape, as it were. So
Fuad, I understand that the anxieties often need a target, right? And it seems like over the last 18 months or so, the DAP has become the kind of lightning rod for much of this criticism. But couldn't the narrative have been different? I mean, couldn't the narrative also have been that the previous administration, UMNO, the leadership that was corrupt and so on and so forth, allegedly corrupt, was the cause of the current miseries? I mean, why did it have to go in the way as it were against Pakatan as opposed to against UMNO?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this is something I'm still trying to wrap my head around too. But in a sense, the anti-DAP sentiment, is irrational and I think exaggerated and misplaced. But that is, I would say, one fraction of the broader set of anxieties. I think you get to think of it as a mishmash of bad feelings, and DAP just happens to be mixed in there. But occasionally there are pertinent issues that these platforms would raise, concerns about political security, concerns about whether or not their identity can be properly represented there rather than just having some token figures at the highest level. They want to talk more about representation in the economy, in the school institutions, in education, and they don't feel that this is being represented enough, Right. But the anti-DAP sentiment is usually animated more at the political level, where, parties are bargaining for power and stuff like that. But on a more everyday sense, granted there's the suspicions against DAP, but that's really a fraction of the broader set of concerns that these platforms are airing out. So it's not always well articulated, but it does hit on something very relevant, and that's the fact that a huge population feel disenfranchised despite being the majority. It's a conundrum. Yeah. The liberals haven't really gotten.
Well, I completely hear you, Fuad, and I'm just wondering, based on your experience, you founded Project Dialogue, which is all about developing intercultural understanding. So what strategy do you think could exist for either the former Pakatan Harapan or government or civil society organizations? What can they do to adopt, what strategies can they adopt to address some of these anxieties that we've been talking about?
I think there must be a savvier and grounded approach to public relations. I think there must be a way of adopting a certain idiom that resonates with this I guess atmosphere, as it were. I think it's not. I think it's not merely about delivering certain policies. It's a way of building relationships. It's a way of assuring that needs to happen. At the highest level. So it's a question of political communication more than policies or positions necessarily, because the media sphere is very, very complicated. You just can't make a policy and hope for people to get it, So there must be a way of thinking about how we can package the messaging more effectively using an idiom that the Malay populace will resonate with, So and that hasn't been attempted by the previous administration, unfortunately. I think their strategy was just to put some Malays in power, and hopefully the Malay populace will kind of sign up with it, but that apparently wasn't enough. There must be a way of assuaging that can go on in deeper ways. Now, I do want to add too that if you kind of locate this globally, I would position this alongside the broader wave of the rise of the right wing in liberal democracies. The sense that culture and community are significant political idioms. And the liberal project cannot somehow accommodate this, because the liberal project is very state-centered, law-centered, and not necessarily community-centered. I'm obviously giving a very simplified dichotomy here. But if you just look at the rise of conservatism in Europe, the rise of conservative politics globally, there is this push towards more community-oriented politics. There's a push towards a more political project of belonging, and that's what the right wing is speaking to, and that's why it's effective, because there's a groundswell of disenfranchisement that they are recognizing and working on. I feel that what's happening in Malaysia is resonating with that broader trend, especially
Understood.
online.
Yep. It's that part of this global, I guess, move towards the right wing. Thank you so much, Fuad, for joining us this evening and sharing those insights. Now we're going to take a quick break. Come back to Thomas Fann, who's still in the studio with us, the chairperson of Bersih 2.0. Next on Consider This. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us on this special edition of Consider This. I'm Melisa, Idris, with me Sharaad, Kuttan, and we're going to continue our conversation with Thomas Fann, who joins us in the studio. Thomas is the chairperson of Bersih 2.0. Sharaad, you had a question for Thomas?
Yeah, I'm just coming off what Fuad Rahmat from Nottingham University kind of suggested, which is that much of the language reform is legalistic. And one of the things, and the buzzwords around it are like colorblind, the new Malaysia would not even think of race. But in doing that, did it then foreclose the possibilities of even recognizing that there were genuine anxieties among people, that this was going to be a long-term project, not something that could be fixed in Parliament, but it really also was cultural and social in nature? Do you think that element is missing, in the thinking about reforming Malaysia? Yes,
I think the problem that was described by what is real, and it's actually very deep-seated, and it goes back to way back probably, And I think that's a real concern, because it does also affects the kind of politics that we are seeing right now, manifesting itself in a very identity-based kind of politics. But I think for what we are doing in electoral reform, we are extremely aware of that situation. And we actually have been, since the change in government, advocating basically for the government to consider tweaking our electoral system so that it is actually more reflective of the population, diverse population that we have. Not just by ethnicity, because we cannot assume that all Malay are the same, but there are different shades, and all Chinese are the same, or Indian are the same. And I think changing to a more proportional kind system would actually allow the different voices to be heard. Now, the anxiety that people express in social media is they felt unheard of. No, there's no representation for their kind of concerns, what's important to them. So I think re-looking at the how we elect people also would change the incentive for politicians. That's a very important reform that I think we should consider.
Right. So with the resignation of Dr. Mahathir came the collapse of the government of Pakatan Harapan. Of course, there were all these jawatan kuasa, there were all these commissions, including the Electoral Reform Commission. What news do we have of that? I mean, is that ended? Will you all send letters to say, I'm sorry, don't have to come into work on Monday, there's no more meetings? Well, what happened to that?
Well, actually, you know, I mean, we are on the Electoral Reform Committee, and we have a monthly meeting every on Wednesday, last Wednesday of the month, and it happened to be tomorrow, and I got an email saying that has been postponed.
Oh,
so,
dear.
And that's the first time that has happened, and I think I would just say it's on hold. You know, until
are you optimistic?
Are you worried that some of the progress, whatever progress that we've made, could be halted or worse, backtracked?
For sure, for sure. I mean, there has been progress made on the electoral reform front. I think you just look at the new election commission. I think it's a lot more transparent. It's a lot more efficient in running by-elections. We are just afraid that that can be reversed because the power is still in the hand of the Prime Minister. And that's why, you know, we have been advocating that we must change the law to make them truly independent, and that hasn't done yet. You know, so of course we have a lot of plans moving forward, working with the ERC, but now we are just on hold and wondering whether we will get back there. But whatever it is, you know, we're here for the long haul. We'll keep pushing for reform, whoever is in government.
We do have, of course, one other legislative, you know, kind of win for the government, which was the lowering of the voting age. Now, that can that be reversed, or will that be, if, say, for instance, we go to a snap election, will that be put in place? Will people at 18 be voting in the next election if it was held in the next 6 weeks or so?
Yes, that was a great success of the Pakatan Harapan government, lowering to 18 and automatic voter registration. And that is a constitutional amendment which I don't think can be reversed, you know. But unfortunately, if there's a snap election called within 6 weeks to 60 days, that won't be in time. Because from the very start, the chairman of the Election Commission has said it would take them about 1.5 to 2 years, and we are looking at mid next year before this can materialize, and we won't be in time for it. So 18 and above, unfortunately, you know, 18 to 21, you can't get to vote if there's a snap election.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, come back and join us after this. More on Consider This. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us, folks. Melisa and Sharaad here tonight. This is a special edition of Consider This, as we speak to experts and activists to make sense of the current political crisis in the country right now. We have joining us on the line Dr. Sharifah Shahira Said Sheikh, political analyst. Shahira, thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to begin with your observations of the discourse surrounding the recent political developments. Now, what have you found particularly interesting about the narratives that are used to explain the events of the last few days?
Okay, thank you so much, AWANI, for calling me. I'm currently conducting a survey based on the narratives made by netizens. And I can identify around 3 blocks, okay? Number one, the one that are calling traitors. This one usually is the current government, the Pakatan Harapan. And the other one is a supporter of supporting Tun's move by saying that thank you God and so forth. And usually they are split into 2, UMNO and PAS member, and also other particularly Malays. And then we have another 3rd block, which is actually maybe representing Malaysian as overall Malaysian. They feel like numb and they feel less interested with the drama and feels that this drama is not actually having any direct benefit for their well-being.
Are there people who feel that this shouldn't have come to pass, that they feel betrayed, they want to withdraw from politics? Because sometimes, people want to actually disengage as a consequence of crisis.
Yeah, the thing is, they feel that it's just 22 months old, the government, and there are so many issues are not solved. For example, like the cost of living, unemployment, especially for the youth, their main concern is about their well-being, where their life going to head from here. So instead of concentrating on the politician affairs, most Malaysians feel that it's supposed to be their affair, Malaysian affairs, not the politician affair. So, based on my survey, which is actually now around 600 people responding to my survey, it seems to be like there are mixed reaction, and it actually portrayed the 3 blocks, whereby a lot, it's like 30%, and nearly 30+% said they just don't have any views about this scenario.
Sharifah, this is really interesting to me because you're saying that it's almost equally split down 3 ways, right? In terms of the 3 blocks that you mentioned. Has your survey found anything in terms of the age breakdown? Do we know whether young people are interested in what's happening or concerned in what's happening with the collapse of the Pakatan Harapan government? Or is this mainly a concern of perhaps an older generation?
They are actually concerned about the current situation of Malaysia. They are concerning about the political party survival or politician survival. They are concerned about the future of Malaysia. They are concerned about what will happen to their well-being in the future. All right, and most of out of the 600, 47.6% of my respondents, they are from 30 to 45 years old, and then 42.4% are 46 to 59 years old. And I think because it's a Google, using technology, so these are the group that answered the question. And it seems to be like there are issues. I asked about the issues, whether Tun Mahathir are still relevant as Prime Minister. It seems to be like nearly more than 50% agree that he is suitable. And the thing about whether DAP is the reason why Bumi Putra is not supporting the government, and it seems to be like it's overwhelming. A lot of them agree with the statement, which is around 75%. So I think there are, there are split opinion about whether this thing that happened is due to political elite arrangement. Many say it's yes, around 45% say yes, and around 20% said no, and most are in the middle. They say they don't know, or they just refuse to give any opinion.
I want to ask you, Shaya, if you think that, because in one of your pieces for New Mandela, you wrote that there's a changing dynamic. People are less loyal to parties, they're more interested in the candidate, and they're more interested in sort of local issues. Do you think over the last 18 or 20 months that we've had of the Pakatan Harapan government, this dynamic has continued, that people are getting changing their attitudes towards political leadership and politics in general? Or do you think it's moving back to, party loyalty and the older forms of relationships that existed in Malaysia?
All right. In terms of, I have written an article on erosion of polarization in Malaysia. In terms of political party loyalty, I think it's very fluid now, which is actually better because it's a sign of matured democracy. In other words, when they give opinion, it's more about what rakyat needs instead of what party needs. All right? But when it comes to, again, based on our history and also our racial polarization, all right, it seems to be like here it shows it kind of most majority feel that the majority Malaysian feels that their voice is underrepresented, and kind of like due the government, the previous government, the Pakatan Harapan government has a little bit give more room, too much room for DAP to voice a little bit too loud. This is the thing about democracy. We need to always able to have this balance of power. Within the population, which is actually the representation must put the voice and the representation and the interest of that politician voice out must be have this mirror reflecting the composition of the population. Yeah.
Very quickly, I just want to know, in the coming months and perhaps years, so what will you be looking at in terms of how young people come to understand what's happened with the political crisis and politics in general?
Yeah, the thing is, they do know that politics is the platform for people to get what they want, and the negotiation and the participation is very important. And but what they want, the youth nowadays, they want a respect. You need to earn the respect. So they want a politician who they can respect. In other words, a politician that able to give what they are interested in. In terms of jobs, yeah, in terms of economic, in terms of better house price. Those are the things that they want. And now, although we still have this a lot of issues related to race and religion, but I think if we can go for what rakyat needs and talk more about the well-being of rakyat, especially about the youth, definitely we will able to reduce this, racial and religion manipulation. For me, it's more about a political warfare. It's easier to use these two, and history has shown so many in any part of the world. These two elements indicator of power, which is actually race and religion, is usually works. But for us to move towards a developed and advanced country, I think it's time for us to talk more about people's well-being and what people genuinely need instead of what politicians need.
All right, thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your insights. Dr. Sharifah Shahira Said Sheikh, political analyst there with her insights. We're going to take a quick break. After this, though, Hishamuddin Rais joins us in the studio, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Yeah, when it's sabotage by Anwar bin Ibrahim.
Thank you for staying with us on this special edition of Consider This. We're speaking to activists and experts making sense of the current political crisis. Joining us in the studio, we've had Thomas Fann, chairperson of Bersih 2.0 since the beginning of the show. And now joining us, we have Hishamuddin Rais, activist. Hisham, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us late in the evening.
Ahlan wa sahlan, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so first off, you were at Sheraton PJ on Sunday, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there, yes.
You were
correct.
there along with Datuk Sri Azmin Ali, Zuraida Kamaruddin, Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah Barubian, among others. Now, Hisham, were you part of this attempt to change the government?
I'm not part of the attempts to change the government. I'm part of the attempt to block Anwar Ibrahim to become the Prime Minister of Malaysia. That's it, it's clear. That was my brief. My brief is that to stop Anwar Ibrahim from becoming the Prime Minister of Malaysia and to make sure that Tun Dr. Mahathir continue as the Prime Minister of Malaysia as one full term. That's it, that's my brief. That's why I was there.
Right. And when you say your brief, do you mean somebody gave you a brief?
No,
or
no, no,
something
no. It's not somebody gave a brief. It's my own personal, what I'm doing now is actually, what you are seeing now for the past, you say this for past Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and today is Tuesday. No, for me it's longer than that. This is a manifestation. What we're seeing here now is the manifestation. The manifestation of the desire of one man to become the Prime Minister. What we are seeing here now is a conflicting interest. The desire of Anwar Ibrahim to become the Prime Minister, one portion, and another pocket of people who is blocking Anwar Ibrahim from becoming the Prime Minister of Malaysia. That's what's happening now. What we see now, what you're debating now, what is it? It's just the manifestation of this event. So the essence is actually these two things what's happened. What you're seeing is now is the manifestation of this contradiction of these two events.
All right, so you say your brief was to block Anwar Ibrahim from becoming Prime Minister, right?
Yeah.
What is your role exactly, Hisham?
my role specifically, I'm just observing. I'm always there. I'm Merakab Stara. I'm the thing. If you recall the 10 days that shook the world, the famous book of the Bolshevik Revolution 1917.
By John Reed.
By John Reed. I was there. I mean, the last time was at Sharaad too. I was there. I was just an observer. I noted it and I observed and I write, and that's why I was there.
Okay, but I would say, Hisham, one of the things is that the narrative that you have is that of Azmin Ali, right? Azmin Ali put it on Facebook that he had heard word that that Anwar Ibrahim was moving against Dr. Mahathir, and therefore he came out to save Dr. Mahathir. Now, you'd expect that as a consequence of that, of saving Dr. Mahathir would embrace Azmin Ali and the group of people who've come, by some people called traitors, other people called saviors, perhaps. But the question is, why hasn't that panned out? Why is it that if Azmin Ali was saving Dr. Mahathir, like you, saving him from Anwar Ibrahim, that Dr. Mahathir has not in fact embraced Azmin Ali?
No, that's bigger than that. What you see is just one part of the manifestation. That was what happened. I mean, theoretically, if Pakatan Harapan still exists, our Prime Minister today is Anwar bin Ibrahim. Touch wood, it's not happening.
So you were willing to help the fall of Pakatan Harapan?
No, it's not the fall of Pakatan Harapan. This is not about the fall of Pakatan Harapan. This is to save the country from Anwar Ibrahim. That's it.
What is the narrative?
The narrative is that I think because, okay, there's this element, yeah, this element, there are people who are objecting to Anwar Ibrahim. Okay, it's not.
Is it
For me, why it's happened? Because I believe that the agenda reformasi has been hijacked. It's been hijacked, telah dibajak. It's been hijacked by Anwar Ibrahim since the night. On the 9th of May 2018, it's been hijacked. So for the past 2 years, we have not been talking anything but about who is the next Prime Minister, who and I will, when I did, after APEC, what day, what time, Tuesday or Monday. So that's all the debates being on. We have failed, I'm sure. A lot of people, we fail. We are not, you are discussing to me today by right, should be be asking me, hey, Hisham, what you have done with the reform agenda? No, we are not. We are talking, will the business Prime Minister, will Anwar take over after APEC? When is that?
Okay, so would you concede that over the last 20 months that there have been reforms, the voting age has been lowered, there has been attempts to talk about or table the decriminalization of drug use, the end of the death penalty.
Correct.
Hasn't that also been true?
Yes, true. This is the success of the Pakatan Harapan, yes. But there are also elements that's a major thing that there's a lot of the civil society is still not happy what's going on. There's a thing that the hanging thing is still going on, the debate is still going on, the interracial campaign is still going on. So there are things that we can move forward. But all these things, the agenda, the big reform agenda have been hijacked. We are debating. Why are you inviting me here to debate about this thing? By right, theoretically, you should be inviting, hey Hisham, what have you done since you are in Bersih? You should come to the street, what have you done? Show me your report card. No, I cannot show. Yes, you mentioned Mr. Sharaad Kuttan, you mentioned the report. But for me, the bigger agenda, the more, to move forward, the racial thing have not. So this is the big thing because I think the manifestation of the battle between those people who are for Anwar Ibrahim and those people who are. But on behalf of this, the background of this, there's a very important, I think Sharifah mentioned it just now, your earlier speaker mentioned now, the national question. The national question has not been resolved. This is the fundamental thing, and it's reflected, it's reflected in the composition. It reflected the hatreds of the Malays toward the AP, the hatred of the Malays. This is the national question, has not been resolved. So this is the bigger agenda which I'm proposing.
Well, that's precisely why we're hearing all the different voices today. We want to hear from civil societies, from activists, from people on the ground who are championing the reform agenda. I mean, Thomas, I'm sorry you've been caught in the middle of two fiery gentlemen here.
Yeah.
I want to get your thoughts now, Thomas. I mean, what do you think of all the things that Hisham just said? Do you agree that the reform agenda has been hijacked?
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting narrative I'm hearing here, that in order to save the reform agenda and stop Anwar Ibrahim, you embrace people from PAS and UMNO, and do you think that they are better at fulfilling the reform agenda? Come on, we have been struggling on the street all these decades.
No. The thing is that the past and UMNO came later because they have a personal interest. Because they have a personal interest, because some of them are on trial, some of them being charged. And today it's proven to everyone. We come back to square one. We come back to Pakatan Harapan.
But didn't Azmin Ali sit with Tunku Adnan and all those people who were actually essential to allowing this to happen? I mean, if you say you want to prevent Anwar Ibrahim, and so the price of it was the destruction of Pakatan Harapan and the creation of a Mufakat national government.
Yeah, there was this another agenda. That agenda, which is I'm not subscribing to the agenda. As I mentioned to you, I have this brief when I've told to you to block Anwar Ibrahim from Prime Minister, and then to sprung. That's the brief. Actually, that is the SD, the statutory declaration that has been signed by all those people. They only did this. I'm referring to the brief. Menyokong Dr. Mahathir sebagai Perdana Menteri, then the other one is so that's it. So that was the brief actually. So that's the brief. So that's when I say just now why I was the Sharaad is implementing the brief. Then come these people who have a personal interest. Well, Tunku Nan, for example, Zaid Hamidi, for example, these are people who have cases to be answered in the court.
Sure.
So they were opportunistically hoping that there'll be dissolving of this government, then there'll be new government, and hopefully, theoretically, they will scot-free. I don't know. I mean, this is the court will take its law. That is what in their mind. That is what. So, insofar as this is concerned, there is an opportunity thing coming. I call it the satanic versus enter into the two brief. The satanic versus enter.
Okay, so I want to ask you, I think what's interesting is that, Hisham, you have been an activist for democracy. You were on the streets, you were organized. In fact, you were under detention under the Internal Security Act for more than 2 years, right? And you're an activist going back to the 70s with the student movement.
Yeah.
You are exemplary when it comes to talking about civil society activists for progress in this country. Thomas, similarly. But now you find yourselves on different sides of this divide. And I'm trying to understand, why is it that you have found yourself with one group of people, whereas Thomas finds himself arguing for the maintenance of the Pakatan Harapan government and its promise?
The maintenance of Pakatan Harapan, the promise, kosher, that is the same. But the thing is that we do not differ on that. On the civil society, we not differ. But on to accept or not to accept Anwar Ibrahim, that is where the differences is. There are people, as I've said just now, the main narrative is that, the body is that, there's one pocket against Anwar Ibrahim, there's one pocket for Anwar Ibrahim. Yes, go ahead.
Thomas, personalities.
You know, I think it's time for us to look beyond the personalities. We talk about Mahathir, Anwar, Azmin, and this and that. The bigger picture here is this country, the reform agenda that is good for this country. And that is, I think, our only interest.
Okay.
I think the focus on the personality that's stopping Anwar and all that thing, this is distracting and it is destroying the reform agenda.
No. About personality, we are the third world country. Whether you go to China, Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, you go to Chiang Kai-shek.
We are not a third world country.
Whether you go to Stalin, Lenin, or whether it's Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, it is the personality. That is the truth about personality. They play an important role. They're iconic. I mean, Che Guevara, Lenin, Trotsky, these are names that play. Bung Karno, it's all. You cannot deny that. And then you have the heritage, Anwar Ibrahim, Nurul Izzah, Wan Azhar. These are personalities. I'm talking, this is the truth. This is how human beings react naturally.
Okay, I want to ask you, Hisham, why do you think, and I don't know if this is true, but correct me if I'm wrong, that this attempt has failed? That in fact, you observing, you might say, this group of people, Azmin Ali, Zoraida, and the 11 have failed.
Yeah.
UMNO and PAS have failed.
Yeah.
Why do you think they failed?
Why did they fail? Because all of them have an interest, different interests, but united in one portion. That's to block Anwar Ibrahim. So when they realize it, Tun Dr. Mahathir refused to play balls. That's where the whole thing failed. You see,
why did he refuse? If this was in his interest. Why did he refuse?
No, it's not in his. He doesn't. You see, what happened is that I'm giving you a metaphor. When we are kids in the kampong, in the village, we go and play in the river, bathe in the river all day long. And then somebody, an elderly guy, is the Tok Haji, hey, Hisham, you have been all day in the river. don't your father know about this? You know. Then I said, no, my father. But actually, my father didn't know that I've been spending all my weekend in the river. So this is what happened. There are elements of people who claim themselves doing things on behalf of Tun Dr. Mahathir. That's why. So so it's true, the statutory declaration is true, it's black and white. That is where I stood to the brief. But the rest of the thing, they are dealing, willing, and because that's interest. I have said that UMNO have an interest to be scot-free. The other people scot-free. They were even interested in forming. Yes, it's true. But I'm not with this and this. And when I was the last, when I saw Kuttan there, it's so nauseating. I mean, I just say I walk out. I mean, I'm supposed to be there to record what happened, merakam sejarah like I did in the last time in Sharaad, where I could not stomach it anymore. It's honestly, I said no. That's the end of it. The moment I'm so sorry that I have to give the figure of Kuttan. But at least,
but okay, one short response from you, Thomas.
Yes.
Do we and can we get away from this politics? This politics of personalities, of loyalty to persons, that has driven our politics for such a long time, especially over the last 20 years.
You know, in all this narrative about stopping Anwar and saving Mahathir and all that, what about the Rakyat? Okay. Who is thinking about the Rakyat? No, I mean, right now, the Rakyat is feeling a sense of betrayal. They chose one government and now it's been reconfigured and things like that.
We're going to come back. We're going to take a breather now and then perhaps come back with cooler heads after this on Consider This. Don't go anywhere. Hello, good evening. If you've just joined us, this is a special edition of Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you. We were speaking to Thomas Fann, chairperson of Bersih 2.0, and activist Hishamuddin Rais. They've just taken a quick breather now to perhaps calm down a little bit, and we're going to discuss. We've got William Case on the line. William Case is a professor and head of the School of Politics, History and International Relations at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. William, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, you know, in 2018, 2 years ago, you had in fact warned that the Pakatan Harapan coalition should not roll out institutional and policy reforms too far, too fast, you said, or they could face an authoritarian backlash. Now, is this the crisis, the backlash that you warned of?
Well, sort of. Please don't remind me of that the presentation of a year and a half ago. But well, it's kind of a backlash, but it is not played out in precisely the way I would have expected. I thought maybe that Pakistan would have pushed its reforms too quickly, and would probably have been too egalitarian in its approach to different ethnic communities, and in this way would spark sort of an ethno-religious Malay Muslim backlash. That's not exactly what's happened. Instead, we're getting a different kind of response. The dynamic is extremely fluid at the moment. I'm not quite sure how to label it just now.
William, I want to ask you, in your assessment, have the reforms over the last 20 months been too fast, too quick? I mean, have they, in fact, demonstrated an extreme form of egalitarianism? Have they sidelined the Bumiputra agenda? All those things that you say would have gone into the mix of this backlash.
Yeah, that's your powers of recall are very good. But no, I don't think really that those reforms have gone as far as many people had hoped at the time. So I don't think that's the cause of any backlash today. There were a couple of notable improvements. I mean, if you're looking at this from a democratic or civil liberties perspective, a couple of things are good, and one of which, I guess, is that the free press seemed to be better respected. And I guess also that the level of probity, the behavior amongst many of the ministers, vastly improved over the previous government. Other than that, when you think more generally about, I don't know, controlling patronage, and if you think about, I don't know, most recently the use of SOSMA, preventive detention, these sorts of things were very worrying. So I wouldn't say that the reforms had gone too far or too fast. No, that's not what has caused this to happen.
But looking at, so let's look at this crisis for what it is, and what do you, in your assessment, and I know the situation is quite fluid, but is this in fact the normal part of, coalition politics? Would you find a scenario such as this in a mature democracy, for instance?
You might, but we're not used to seeing this in Malaysia, that's for sure. I've got just taking an outsider's perspective here for a moment. We think way back, and look, this country had been very, very stable for a very long period of time. As a political scientist who comes from far away, we used to look at Malaysia and see that the most stable countries in East Asia were probably Japan, Singapore, and Malaysia, and that was the case for many, many decades. So what's happening here is sort of unexpected, and what has sort of set this off was the last election. What we've seen is a breakdown in what political scientists sometimes like to call the single-party dominant system. We don't have a dominant party anymore, but instead a new kind of coalition, and it's very, very fluid. And so we've gone away from single-party dominance, and now we have this sort of a multi-party free-for-all. And it's become much more fluid and much more unstable than what we used to see here in the Malaysian setting.
I mean, an article of faith of many of us who are liberals or count ourselves as Democrats is that democracy is a natural good. That, in fact, you don't have to look too deeply into what it promises. But is one of the trade-offs stability? Will we and should we come to terms with the fact that instability might actually become the norm rather than an aberration?
Well, again, I like the use of political models here, but political scientists don't like to make predictions, actually. Too often we are proved wrong and embarrassed. And so I can't say what's likely to unfold here in the future. But I would say that, look, since the decline of Barisan Nasional and the very unique set of circumstances that gave rise to that, and the kind of record that at some level they were able to establish, that's going to be very difficult to recreate. And so, okay, we've gone into a more democratic setting, but in many respects, the old regime persists. There's lots of ferment on the ground. There's lots of structural and ethno-religious tensions. And it's unclear how well democracy might be able to mediate those things. So personally, I agree with you. I think that democracy is probably the best way in which to organize political life in most instances. But it does run many risks and lots of drawbacks, and that's one of the reasons, perhaps, that democracies under such a challenge today, and has real difficulty, in particular, in mediating relationships between rival ethnic communities.
Well, okay, so I hear you, William, about not wanting to make predictions. I'm not going to ask you to make predictions. It's a fluid situation. But what are some of the landmines that we should be looking to avoid in the coming days?
In the coming days, let's see. I wouldn't place too much importance, I don't think, on a single leader to resolve the many difficulties and challenges this country is facing. I know that leadership is capable leadership, desirable leadership is in short supply right now. But so we're all hoping that one man who's got obvious political experience and knows the infighting and the like is going to be able to stabilize and resolve the situation. But I think that's a mistake, to probably rely on a single leader to be able to resolve the kinds of challenges and contradictions and tensions that Malaysia is facing right now. So you need better institutionalization of some kind, and I'm not sure what that would look like, but at the moment you need a more stable party system, and at the same time too, I think you probably need well, I'm not sure. I would start with that and say that really the kind of very fluid, even chaotic party system that we see at the moment, that's got to be in some way, that's got to be institutionalized and stabilized.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, William. We appreciate you calling in so late in the evening and sharing those insights. We're going to take a quick break after this. Thomas and Hisham back in the studio with us. We're going to continue that conversation. Stay tuned to Consider This. Thank you so much for staying in this special edition of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris with Ms. Sharaad Kuttan. We have Hishamuddin Rais, activist, in the studio with us, alongside Thomas Fann, chairperson of Bersih 2.0. It was a heated argument, heated conversation a little bit earlier in the evening. We're going to keep that going. We spoke a little bit earlier to William Case from University of Nottingham, Malaysia, and I mentioned that he had pointed out a couple of years ago that there could be an authoritarian backlash should Pakatan Harapan roll out their reform policies, institutional reforms too far, too fast. And I'm wondering, Thomas, do you think that this is the authoritarian backlash? Do you think Pakatan Harapan should have adopted a more measured pace in rolling out these reforms?
I fully agree with Professor Case that it's not a case of institutional reforms that was rolled out too fast. In fact, from our perspective, it is a bit too slow. But I think the problem is really how they roll out some of the reform. I think of like ISET, Statue of Rome, and I think a lot more thought should have gone into it and engagement with the public before something like that is rolled out. I think that is a failure, and that has provoked the backlash.
Okay.
I agree. For example, let's say the case of ISET. This is the process, the failures of the people who come to power to understand what is actually the process of democratization. I criticize them because it should be debated, it should be open, the town hall meeting to discuss. And you remember ISET, it wasn't even translated into a Malay word. I said, apa tu makcik? I said tu ten, dia tak tahu dah. So they didn't know about the words. So that's why, dia anti raja, tak suka raja. They were against king and against Islam. That's how it's exploited. By what is actually an international law against racial discrimination. If you ask the makcik, the makcik, it's like that, huh? Tak suka. So that is why it was. That also
why do you think they failed? Was it arrogance? Was it that they got typically complacent?
No, because they do not understand the process of democratization. They have not discussion. Look, for example, the case of smoking. It could have discussed, there are other people come there, how to do it. Japan have banned smoking, a lot of people. But there is process of discussion. This is the process, the failure of Pakatan Harapan to democratize. They don't understand the meaning. Yes, it will take time. We have to take time with that. So that is the process. The process now. Look, the Statue of Rome. You could explain it that if you don't study the Statue of Rome, you cannot. Why you are complaining about the Palestinian? You have
so just a failure of communication is what you're saying.
Yes, the narrative is, yes. That for me, the two cases that Thomas Fann had mentioned, yes, it was the narrative not sold, not discussed, not it's not that I'm for smoking, but it was a good idea, but it failed. Why? You did not tell the people. There are people who are keen. If you explain to them, I'm sure the makcik, the pakcik, the orang kampung, oh, macam tu, oh, it's like that. So they will accept. Instead of saying, I said it's what? Against the king, against Islam.
Did you do anything to help with the communication?
Yes, I did. I told them to explain to them, translate the word I said into bahasa Melayu. Akta Penentangan Bangsa-Bangsa. So that's why I tell them, Statue of Rome, terangkan, explain to the makcik, the pakcik. Then you say, if you do not sign this, you have no credibility to support Rohingya, to support Palestine. You tell them like that. You're not that, oh, kita. So that's why. This is where they fail.
Thomas, what do you think is going on? I mean, is it because we're all new at this game that a lot of the politicians, some of them are actually quite authoritarian? I mean, Dr. Mahathir, notwithstanding, is not exactly known for his democratic credentials. Perhaps not the best suited to lead the democratization process. But okay, tell us. I mean, what do you think is going on?
I think certainly, they are new at governing. That's one thing, and probably some even are not very competent, in governing. But also, I think we have to consider the fact that civil servants are used to doing things a certain way, and this has been the way things have been done always. And I think there has to be going to the ground, to understand the current sentiments and to engage with the ground and to frame whatever that you want to do in a way that people can understand. Because these are actually good laws, good conventions that all of us should accept.
I hear that communication is a big part of it. But no matter how well you communicate something, if there is a trust deficit, it's going to fall on deaf ears. Do you agree that perhaps the trust deficit has played a huge part in the failures?
Look at, you see, unfortunately, the time of Najib Razak, the time of Pakatan Harapan, we are into the world of the new media. Okay, I was just telling them, those days when Tunku Abdul Rahman On the 1st of September 1957, it wasn't like this. In fact, Temenggung juga, they had not go to school. I'm sorry, that's the stage. But today, there's everything. We are available, communication. Everybody is a TV producer. Everybody is a reporter. Everybody is journalist, a radio broadcaster. So these are the things, the new media, they are not used to all these things. So they're assaulted and they respond. Take, for example, our ex-Minister of Education. I mean, he fumbled from the shoe, from the baju, all this. So these are, because as Thomas Fann says, some of them, yes, experience, yes, and they have no idea. At the same time, the civil servant also, there are elements of sabotage. You must understand, today the state split into three. One state is with Pakatan Harapan, one state with Anwar Ibrahim, one state with big portion, hoping that Najib will come back. The other is the deep state. This is what is going on. So these are the factors. So the civil servant is part of the deep state, and you have to really, the professor said, you have to be very careful, and you have to understand this, how the state functions.
No, I mean, communication is a huge issue, and I think the Pakatan Harapan government failed to handle that, especially in this era that you mentioned, you know, social media. Because this is the era of fake news, misinformation, and we are inundated just the last few days. We don't know what is true anymore. I think these are the real challenges that is happening, and I think whoever forms government or Pakatan Harapan come back again, they have to really handle this well. Communication.
Okay. I want to come back to the crisis, because we are talking about the current crisis. Maria Chin took a big hit in terms of her reputation because she was seen at Sheraton. Perhaps you too, Hisham, have taken a big hit, right? No, she, like you said, she left after she noted her protest. You say you left because you saw Kuttan there. But the question is, I mean, do you think that all of you in some ways represent a class of people who don't trust each other? Coming back to the Anwar Ibrahim thing, is it because of trust?
No, the thing is that I've said just now, the issue, the essence of this debate, what's going on now, is the two contending situation. One is against Anwar Ibrahim, one is for. This is reflection. This is the manifestation.
Okay, Thomas, how do we get beyond this? If this is the situation,
this is the essence.
We're all going to be sacrificed on the basis of this contradiction, of this split. What do we do?
Well, I think, first of all, you know, we have to change our focus, especially politicians, from the personalities, and start looking at the structural problems that we have inherited all these decades, and how we can strengthen them so that it doesn't matter that a monkey become a prime minister, because the institution, the structure is going to keep them behaving. You know, that is the priority right now in New Malaysia.
But can we achieve that now? It's not a process.
We can't achieve with this sort of politician. We can't achieve them. You know, they are just thinking of themselves.
But look, listen, you must understand carefully. The experience of a changes the government is the first time. The same experience held by in Mesir, in Tunisia, also in Korea, and in Japan, and in there's always a back. The new government is always the first government that overthrew the is the experimentation. This too. I'm not saying the justification we have to follow, but this is there. In Maldives, it follows the same thing, because everybody is new. Everybody is new. Sometimes go to their head, the power. It's a new process. Yes, you look at the Kuomintang, they fall, they come in. Look at in the Korea. I'm telling you, the experience what we have now is good. It's education process. For me, it's education process. It's the journey of the human civilization. It's the journey of fellow Malaysians.
We have a couple of minutes left, and I want to take this opportunity because something you said earlier has been bothering me, Hisham. You said you left Sheraton on Sunday because you saw the UMNO politicians arrive. Did you not know that they were going to arrive? Was that a surprise?
No, it's not.
Were they uninvited?
No. Those things was afterthought. That's why the whole thing thought there was all planned. No, it was when their project failed, when they were hoping that Mahathir played balls, then they created the sting, you understand? So that was afterthought, you understand? The dinner was afterthought. I was there when asking, they were heckling about the price of per table. It was at 5:30 before you, that's what I'm saying. And asking, so I was observing the whole thing because I am merakam sejarah. I saw that. So it was Did you observe
who paid the bill?
No. I don't observe who paid the bill. I observe who was heckling about how much with the hotel manager, what was the menu. It wasn't...
Can you consider who organized the dinner? Maybe the bill will not get paid. But I want to ask you this.
Yeah.
Thomas, where do we go from now? What are the likely scenarios? How do we heal the rifts in the interest of the country? How do we do this in the interest of the country too, Hisham?
Okay. For me, the process of democratization have to go on. The debate have to go on, the process of democratization, and I think the new government, whoever. But now we come back to the same Pakatan Harapan, which was dismantled and come back. And so the debate, what happened now is, as I've said just now, the thing between forces for Anwar Ibrahim, there's no in between now. You know, the battle is going on, so it has to be resolved, because since the 9th of the 9th May, it's been going on about this process. It has to, theoretically for me, that Friday should be the end of it.
Okay, Thomas, very quickly, what do you think will happen? What do you think must happen?
First of all, we cannot normalize or accept any backdoor government. Simply because if you normalize or accept it, it will destroy people's belief in our democracy. Why bother to vote a general election when you are going to change bait and change the thing? You know, this is undermining people's confidence in the democracy, and we have to reject it. And the only way to do it is if Pakatan cannot reform themselves as a government, have a snap election. Go back to the people.
No, I will disagree with that, because in any process, whether in German, Social Democrat, they go and change. This is quite normal.
Yes.
All is quite normal. Liberal Democrat, the coalition, it's happened everywhere.
There's nothing, a different system.
I know it has a process of
on that note, we agree to disagree, and thank you so much for
bring
watching.
Them back again, Melisa.
we have to bring them back for another special edition of Consider This. Thank you for staying with us so late in the evening. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad, Kuttan, signing off for tonight. Thank you for watching, and good evening.
Good night.